You're listening to the Swap Society podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Robertson. I interview thought leaders and change makers who are working to create a more sustainable and equitable world through fashion, art, and activism. Join us for a dose of climate optimism as we envision a brighter future. Hey everyone, welcome to the Swap Society podcast. Today I'm talking with Clare Richardson from Extinction Rebellion Fashion Action, a decentralized activist group pushing for radical system change within the fashion industry. XR Fashion Action is a sister organization to Extinction Rebellion and uses nonviolent civil disobedience to bring about a transition to a fashion model that does not rely on the exploitation of people and the planet. Hi, Clare. Thank you for being on the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So where are you talking to us from today, and where are you from originally?
So I'm talking to you from Manchester in the UK today, but I'm originally from down south in Essex. So I moved up here for university 5 years ago and then never left university. So I'm still here.
Are you getting your PhD currently?
I am, I'm 9 months in to the PhD.
And what is your focus?
So my focus is on sustainability in the fashion industry. And looking at technological drivers potentially towards a slower industry.
Very cool. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be involved with XR Fashion Action.
Sure. I mean, well, first of all, I want to say that I'm 23, so I grew up with the climate crisis. I can remember being as young as 10 and seeing what we then called global warming on the news and feeling this real deep anxiety, I suppose. So I think that kind of dread and urgency was embedded somewhere in me quite young. But my key interest growing up was always fashion and clothing. I studied textiles through school. I went off to university to study fashion technology. I had every intention of working in the industry. But the more I learned about the industry, the more kind of horrified I became. The more I realized how this thing, fashion, that we see as innocent and fun and empowering is actually really horrible. And it's completely reliant on these kind of awful post-colonial racist, sexist structures. It's this gross capitalist idea we aren't good enough unless we buy more, all this production completely depleting natural resources, causing all this huge ecological damage. So I think it felt like while I was doing my undergrads, the more I learned about the industry, the more it seemed to make no sense to me, and I didn't want any part of it. Hence why I've kept studying and been lucky enough to be given the opportunity to do a PhD and support myself that way. But my involvement with Extinction Rebellion came about a number of years ago now. I remember the moment because I was on holiday in the Peak District with my parents, and I read a newspaper article about an Extinction Rebellion protest in London, and I just remember thinking, yep, that's what I need to do. That's where I need to be. That's where I need to put this fear and this anxiety. So I went home and I got in touch with my local group, I think on Facebook, and through them I met some really great friends, and I organised a number of fashion related actions in Manchester with them. Then eventually we got in touch with Fashion Action UK, and now here I am.
The fashion industry is often overlooked in the broader climate crisis conversation. Why did Extinction Rebellion decide to also have a focus on the fashion industry?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that's a really important thing to talk about, that fashion is this kind of huge, more than anything, it's this huge multi-billion-dollar industry. It's also one of the most polluting industries. I mean, I'm always a little bit hesitant when people try and quantify how polluting an industry is, because people get all tied up in it and there's too many factors really. But fashion is generally agreed to be in the top 3 most polluting industries in terms of things like emission levels and fossil fuel usage and water pollution and landfill. As you say, it's very often completely ignored. And Ruth McGill, who's Fashion Revolution, she had some really interesting things to say about this on a panel discussion we ran after COP26. She made the point that fashion, despite being this massively profitable and damaging industry, is still very much viewed as this kind of frivolous women's issue that can possibly have any kind of serious impact or require any serious conversation. And she spoke about discussing legislation with these primarily male MPs while they kind of are falling asleep, because as soon as you say the word fashion, people do seem to really struggle to have any kind of serious conversation. So yeah, I do think misogyny definitely plays a big role in what you were saying about fashion often being left out of conversation to do with the climate crisis, and also being incredibly underregulated. And yeah, that definitely also extends into the people who are most affected by this underregulation. Garment workers are primarily women. I think it's as many as 80% of garment workers are women, and primarily women of colour as well. So again, you get this kind of oppressive post-colonial attitude. These women somehow don't exist or don't matter, which is definitely true of our entire attitude to the climate crisis. In the Western world, women of colour are facing the brunt of it. And I personally think that's a really big reason as to why we seem to really struggle to take it seriously. And that's kind of amplified in fashion for sure. So I think we chose to focus on fashion as a kind of small collective arm of Extinction Rebellion for that reason, that no one's talking about it in any serious way. The people who are suffering as a result of this industry, they deserve to be seen and they deserve to be heard, and they aren't being. And equally, the people who are giving their money to this industry, they deserve to know the reality of what's going into their clothing. And again, nobody's telling them. So yeah, I mean, it's a huge multifaceted problem, as we know. It's hard to make this concise, but it's an industry that's literally getting away with murder. The fashion industry operates outside the law. More than anything, it operates outside, hopefully, anyone with a heart's moral compass in countless ways. And it couldn't exist as it does today, producing these huge quantities at these tiny prices without human and labour rights abuse and ecocide. And seemingly no one is doing anything real about it. So yeah, we're trying to, I suppose.
Well, and something that I think about a lot as well is that as much as I love clothing, right, and personal style, I don't think it should come at the expense of other humans or at the expense of the planet. And it really is this kind of low-hanging fruit in a lot of ways. It's not necessary to have the volume of clothing that we're buying and that we're producing. And so it is so destructive to the environment and to the people who make our clothes. And it's really unnecessary. I mean, we need to have clothes to wear, but the amount of clothing that people in the Western world have today is far beyond what we actually need to clothe our bodies. So I think that that's also something for us, or for me personally, that, when I'm talking to people, just trying to kind of get them interested in this topic, because, you and I are working in this same area, but most people don't even know about any of this. They don't know about how polluting fashion is. They don't really think about, overconsumption in this way. And so I also feel like clothing is this universal thing that we all wear and that we can relate to. And it's this kind of easy first conversation that you can have with someone, or kind of that first foot in the door of transitioning to a more sustainable lifestyle where you could say, look, there are lots of secondhand options. You probably have enough clothing in your closet to last you for a very long time. You know, you can take this small step and start living a bit more sustainably and using your wardrobe as a tool for social change.
Yeah, definitely. And I think clothing being a unifying thing, that's really interesting as well, because, like we say, it's not taken seriously, especially in male-dominated spaces like politics. But then you just feel like shouting at these people, what are you wearing? You're wearing clothes. You're affected by the fashion industry, whether you like it or not. You are engaged in the fashion industry. So yeah, it's a unifying industry, definitely. I wish we could properly view it that way. I mean, I think we shouldn't call it the fashion industry, we should call it the clothing industry, because I think people hear the word fashion and they think fashion, nothing to do with me. But yeah, it certainly has the potential to be a real unifier, in terms of talking about the climate crisis and, you know, social and ecological issues.
So it does say on the XR Fashion Action website that as an organization, you are anti-fashion. What does that mean, and what is the alternative?
Yeah. Okay, this is a very good follow-on from what we were just talking about. Yeah, I think anti-fashion is very interesting, an interesting concept. I mean, I think fashion is quite an interesting word in that it's been adopted as a synonym for clothing when it isn't. It refers to, you know, a trend or a style of the moment, and it's that we're against, the idea that in order to be relevant or on trend, you have to continuously buy more and update your wardrobe. And that's why I think the fashion industry, I think a perfect kind of name for the fashion industry that I've heard thrown around a few times is capitalism's darling. It's a perfect money-making machine. It's capitalism's darling. It's perfect because it's managed to convince everyone that kind of, you know, wearing the same thing twice is a sin, and that we need to completely update our wardrobe at least every season, but, you know, ideally every month. So you can't relax, you can't stop buying, or you'll be left behind. And it's quite hard to get out of that mindset. But in terms of an alternative, I think, well, like I said, I think we should first of all refer to the industry as the clothing industry, because that's what it is. And we can drop this notion of, like, you know, cyclical fashion trends and relevance, and instead focus on, I suppose, focus on reframing clothing so that we don't view it as disposable as we have come to, but as a well-loved and valuable and long-lasting commodity that we cherish. And, you know, considering the labour and resources that go into an item of clothing, it is a very valuable commodity. It's not disposable. And brands presenting it as such, I always think, is just such a horrible insult to the people and resources behind it. Yeah, I do. I also think that actually breaking free from this trend-led attitude that has been created, it would also be really nice to give people space to explore and discover their own style and, you know, what they think suits them, what they like, rather than feeling forced to kind of chase this constant evolving trend that they'll never catch. I think that would also contribute to this reframing of clothing as something of true value, if it's the clothing you buy is more, I suppose, aligned with you as a person. So yeah, at its heart, I guess the concept of anti-fashion is an industry in which drastically less is produced and consumed, and what is produced is intended to be worn and loved for a very long time, for many, many years, and that we view and treat clothing in line with its real value in terms of what has actually gone into it.
And you did mention colonialism, and I think it would be great to touch on that a bit as well, and also this concept of fashion and what is fashionable. And, so much of the history of fashion has been a way to exclude certain people or to kind of visually identify who belongs to what group. And I think that it's still relevant today and in today's age, even though it doesn't necessarily seem exactly that way or as obvious as it used to be in the past. But can you touch a little bit more on how colonialism has impacted the fashion industry and also planetary degradation? And, it's kind of linked to the climate crisis.
Yeah, I mean, colonialism and the climate crisis absolutely cannot be separated. They are, they come from the same root, I would say. And, if we look at colonialism, exploitation of colonized people in their land, we continue to exploit previously colonized countries and people for cheap labor, and we exploit their land. Primarily, I suppose, the cotton irrigation in the fashion industry is obviously a huge, huge issue in terms of land usage, in terms of water usage, in terms of water pollution in, primarily previously colonized countries. And also we dump all our textile waste on like land that isn't ours as well. We produce all this enormous amount of waste. There's this huge problem now with charity shops being overwhelmed because of the amount that we're disposing of, that, even clothing that we give to charity shops and dispose of in a supposedly, responsible manner, or as responsible as we can, you see these awful pictures of, textile dumps in Gaza because charity shops can't sell these clothes. They're low quality and they've got too many of them. So they're shipped off to other countries. Their textile markets are utterly destroyed. Their textile industries are utterly destroyed because of this huge influx of incredibly cheap clothing that we've decided we don't want to deal with. And then the excess is dumped. I mean, we're still massively exploiting. In the West, we're still massively exploiting our power over the global South. And the fashion industry as it is today, it wouldn't exist without this post-colonial attitude. It wouldn't exist without colonialization, because we wouldn't have access to this sort of exploitative labor and exploited land that we do. And yeah, it's obviously completely unacceptable. But yeah, that's what the fashion industry is built on, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. And XR Fashion Action and Extinction Rebellion in general, uses nonviolent kind of civil disobedience. What are some examples of this, and how effective have these acts been in terms of the public discourse and also within the political system?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can say that we've already seen climate activism actually make big changes. I don't think the UK government would have announced a climate emergency. Not that they're really acting on it, but I don't think they would have, stated a climate emergency if it wasn't for activism. And I truly believe that public awareness would be about 10 years behind us if it wasn't for climate activism. So, you can see the changes, and obviously historically, social change has almost always come about, at least partially, due to activism. But I do think there is potentially a level of misconception about activism because of the forms of activism that get spoken about in media. It's the more dramatic, real, like, glue yourself to a road and get arrested, which that form of activism is necessary, but that's only a really quite a small part of what actually makes an activism movement work. And of course, that's not accessible to everyone by any means. Not everyone can afford to put themselves in a restful position. has to be clearly stated. But there's so much going into, social media actions. There's so much going into outreach. There's so much going into integrating new members, into press, into planning. There is a vital role for everybody in an activist movement. And we also do a lot of low risk actions as well. One of my favourite ones that we do quite regularly in Manchester, actually, is we call them guerrilla repair workshops. So we set up these little repair workshops in shopping centres, and people can bring their clothes to be mended. They can learn how to mend for themselves. We do educational talks, and people can just generally wander over and have a chat and learn. And that also gives you a very good indication of people's view on, climate activism and what's going on. And I will say that I think even in my relatively short time being involved in climate activism, there has been a real shift in public engagement and public opinion on climate activism. It's actually pretty rare now that we get people responding negatively, even people who are being negatively affected. For example, if a road has been blocked and you're stuck, one role is going and speaking to the people in the cars, explaining why they've been stopped, explaining how long it will last. And it's very rare now that we get people saying, F you or whatever. It's normally people saying, get on with it, it's fine, we understand why you're doing it, which is fantastic. And actually today even, I was at a very small protest outside the Misguided headquarters, as they've just, the company is just dissolved and they're not paying any of their suppliers. And somebody from Royal Mail came to deliver something to the headquarters, and he rolled down his window and said, I completely agree with you. They're disgusting. They need to do something about this. Good on you for being here. So, yeah, I think the media peddles this idea that the public hate climate activism, but I think in general, climate activists don't want to annoy people. It's not the general public's fault that this is happening. And, we try and be respectful and act responsibly and explain and listen to people who have problems with what we're doing. But in general, people are pretty on board with what we're doing these days, which is very positive.
That's great. And you did mention this concept of, the individual, and individuals aren't responsible for this. And I think that that's an important distinction. At the same time, though, as individuals, we can make changes in our lives to have a positive impact. What are some things that people can do that care about these issues and care about, the future of life on Earth? What can they do to make a positive change?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to make a positive change. I mean, I'm a bit biased because I would just say get involved in activism in whatever form you feel able to. But also, in terms of making a positive impact in the fashion industry, I would say it's really quite simple, because really the biggest thing you can do is just buy less. Mm-hmm. And making sure that when you do make purchases, you are buying things you use for a really long time. A big one is making sure you follow washing instructions so that your clothes last longer. And yeah, learning how to mend or upcycle, taking damaged pieces to a seamstress rather than viewing them as ruined. And actually those services, I don't know what it's like in the US or elsewhere, but in the UK at least, these services are becoming far more popular on the high street. And there's actually a few apps now as well where you can find local menders. So these services are available. But yeah, I would say just cherish what you have and only buy what you need. And I would say that's a form of activism under capitalism, actually, only buying what you need. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's probably the biggest change you can make that you will genuinely be having an impact. And it's a pretty easy one. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when I learned about the truths about the fashion industry and just how horrific it is from human rights abuses to pollution and just damaging the planet. I didn't really set out to do a shopping ban per se, but it pretty much just happened. And, now I'm about 12 years into not buying new clothes. I mean, there have been a few exceptions, and I buy new, underwear and socks and things like that. But I've bought so few pieces of brand new clothing, and it hasn't negatively impacted my life at all. If anything, I feel like it's enriched my life more. It's made me more creative about style. I've been more open to trying things that maybe I wouldn't have tried before. And it's just radically transformed my relationship with my clothing and what I wear. But I also just feel like it's so much easier now, even than, 10, 12 years ago, to buy secondhand. Mending. I think that here in the United States, there are more people that are thinking about mending their clothes or going to a tailor. And so, it might sound kind of scary to think about not buying new things. You don't even have, to your point, you don't even have to go on an outright ban. You can just buy less in really any category of items that you need. It's not even just clothing. Just like not over consuming is great. A great start.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think, not over consuming to me is the biggest thing you can do, really, in your everyday life anyway. The biggest thing you can do to sort of try and make a difference.
And how can people get involved with XR Fashion Action if they'd like to do that? And do they have to be in the UK to be a part of that?
Right. So first of all, yes, everyone please get involved. Because I know it can sometimes seem a bit hard to get involved in activist groups, but we really want new people. So my XR Fashion Action group is in the UK. So so we meet on Zoom. So the current members are all over the UK. So if you live in the UK, it doesn't matter where, you can join. And we're very friendly. There's always those going on. And we always need more people. But there are other fashion action groups in other countries if you aren't in the UK. So it's definitely worth looking that up. Or if you find that there isn't one anywhere near you, you can start one. Anyone can start an Extinction Rebellion group. You don't need, experience in activism or to know everything about fashion or the climate crisis. You just need to have the drive. So, and again, if you contact us, we can help you with that. So if you are in the UK, though, you can find us on social media at XR Fashion Action UK. You can just message us. Or you can email us at xrfashionaction@gmail.com. And all this information is also on our website, which is xrfashionaction.com. And we tend to have like weekly meetings on Zoom. We're very active. There's always loads going on. So, and as I say, no prior experience in activism or fashion expertise or expertise around the climate crisis is necessary. Just if you're driven to make a change, then you will be an asset, I'm sure.
And you don't have to be arrestable to participate either. That's a small percentage.
Oh, absolutely not. No, in fact, I would say that most of the active members at the moment probably aren't arrestable, actually. And that's actually a pretty rare occurrence that we do arrestable actions because they're exhausting. You absolutely don't have to be arrestable. There's no pressure to do anything. You can stay purely on social media if you want to, or you can do all the other various support roles that are in many ways more necessary than the actual people being arrested. So, yeah.
So I love a good fashion love story. What's your favorite piece in your closet right now and why?
I find this question really hard to answer. But okay, so I'm gonna say this I have this like enormous faux fur coat that I got in a charity shop in my first year of university when I was interested in trying to be edgy. And it's horrible. It doesn't fit me at all. Every time I see a picture of me in it, I think, oh my God, that's horrible. But for some reason, I can't part with it. And I look forward to winter so I can wear it every day. I don't know why. And like the pockets have been replaced 100 times. The sleeves are all like horrible and raggedy. And I'm pretty sure my mum hates it. But I don't know why. I just love it, even though I look horrible in it. So I don't really know if that's a fashion love story. It's a fashion love-hate story.
And who or what is inspiring you right now?
So, I mean, I'm feeling quite inspired. I'm at least feeling a bit riled up today because I was at this misguided protest in Manchester. It was only a very small action. It was in line with a larger protest in London. But I believe this was all organised by Labour Behind the Label. So I would definitely say go and check out Labour Behind the Label because they do so much amazing and inspiring and necessary work on the subject of garment workers and people further down the fashion supply chain. So yeah, like just for some context, we spoke about it briefly earlier, but for anybody who's unaware, Misguided are an online retailer. They recently collapsed and in the process failed to pay millions of pounds owed to their suppliers. And yeah, obviously huge job losses for people in the supply chains, garment workers without wages. And I think they called the police on the suppliers when they came to the headquarters and said, can you give us money? So that says really a lot about where priorities lie in the UK. But yeah, check out Labour Behind the Label and also sign and share their petition to get Misguided to pay their suppliers because they absolutely can't get away with this. But I'm going to give you some book recommendations as well.
Please do.
Because I always like book recommendations. So first of all, I've been reading Hood Feminism,
okay,
which I think in the context of the conversation we were having earlier about women in fashion supply chains, I think it's a really important book because it's kind of highlighting that feminism is often viewed in the context of the white kind of middle class girl boss, and that actually continues to oppress women of other marginalized groups. And I think that's so interesting in the context of fashion because we're quite often told that fast fashion is feminist because it makes these constant wardrobe updates accessible. But that narrative, it seems to suggest that Western women having access to new clothes all the time is more of a feminist notion than women in the global south being safe and getting paid a fair wage. So yeah, I think intersectional feminism in the fashion industry is very interesting and very, very important. I've also been reading, this is a bit of a funny one, I've been reading Rules for Radicals, which is just, it's quite an interesting read for anyone who's involved in activism really, because yeah, it's basically just how to plan a social activist movement, but it tends to pick me up a bit and give me a bit of a kick up the bum if I'm feeling a bit useless. Yeah, those are my book recommendations that have been inspiring me recently.
I love that. And, which brings me to my next question, which is, in this time of extreme eco-anxiety, I know that I have it, and reasonably so. And it sounds like you have your own fair share of it as well, which is why you're doing the work that you're doing. What is keeping you optimistic about the future?
I really love this question. Honestly, the things that give me hope are the friends I've made through activism. Activism it's really hard work. It's not a hobby, which I think it's often viewed as. And it can really feel like kind of banging your head against a brick wall, especially when, everything in regard to the climate crisis is so pressing, it's so urgent, and we're not seeing the radical changes that we need to be seeing. But I always feel so inspired and just not alone every time I come out of a meeting with, you know, the lovely Fashion Action lot. And that's another reason to get involved in activism. If you're experiencing eco-anxiety, I do think that finding a supportive activist movement to get involved in, even if the change you're pushing for feels very slow and frustrating, it will give you that glimmer of, I suppose in some ways, a glimmer of hope, but more than anything, a feeling that you're not alone. Because I'm sure, like, activism, it's isolating. I'm sure you know, eco-anxiety, it can be so isolating. And having time with people who are on the same wavelengths, I think that's kind of almost the only thing that gives me the mental strength to keep going and stay at least a tiny bit hopeful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Is there anything else that you'd like to add or talk about before we say goodbye?
Just please, if you're listening and you think it sounds interesting or exciting, just go out and see what activist groups are active in your local area. There's so many activist movements. There's so many groups that you can get involved in. And you'll probably find as well, if you reach out to one that's local to you, they can introduce you to loads of others, and you know, you'll definitely be able to find your place in climate activism, and you know, find whatever it is that, you know, lights your fire. You'll find it, and yeah, it's not scary. It's not scary. You don't need to know everything. It's, from my experience, a really lovely environment and a really great way to make meaningful change.
And we all have something valuable that we can add to the movement. We all have different talents and ideas, and it really needs as many people as possible. So thank you for sharing that. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with us. I'm really excited for this conversation. We'll link to all of the handles and websites that you mentioned and the books that you recommended will all be in the show notes so people can find those. And if people would like to connect with you personally, how can they find you?
So they can find me on Twitter, which you can link, but it's Clare_Rich with 2 H's. But yes, you can find me on there.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you again. Have a beautiful day. And thank you for the activism and all of the important work that you're doing.
No, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Swap Society podcast. Swap Society is an online clothing swap for women and kids that makes it easy and affordable to mix up your wardrobe sustainably. We're a growing community of women across the USA who are creating positive change by swapping our clothes and slowing down our fashion consumption. We would love to swap with you. If you're interested in joining, you can sign up at our website. Learn more at www.swapsociety.co. That's swapsociety.co. You can find the show notes for each episode on our website. Please get in touch with us on social media too. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and YouTube for the video version of this podcast at Swap Society. Music is by Joel Korolitz and yours truly. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Please help us spread the word by subscribing, leaving a rating and review, sharing on social media, or simply telling a friend. We really appreciate your support. Have a wonderful day, and remember to swap before you shop.